to the Fantasy Footballers Dynasty Podcast with Borg, Betz, and a Baller.
Welcome in to 2025 here on the Fantasy Footballers Dynasty Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Borgnoni, and today is just Borg and Betz.
Just the two of us, Kyle. Corporate, new year, same corporate. They just don't show up. They don't care. Not surprising whatsoever. Yeah, happy to jump into 2025 with the season officially, for the most part, in the rearview mirror. Of course, we still have the NFL playoffs, and that will, I'm sure, give us some more information when we look at Dynasty landscape. But the information we were looking for from this incoming rookie class of last year, we got a lot of info on. So I'm happy to break that down today with you. And I think one of the ballers will be back next week. Is that right?
Yeah, right now, I mean, you think that they're just farting around, and that's probably part of the process.
And they are.
And they are, while also getting to interview some people. We're going to add some people to our team. Web developers. Now, you didn't apply for that role, did you?
No. Can you imagine if my resume came across the desk? It's like, Betz, you literally have zero experience. Yep, that's accurate. For those that aren't aware, I am an idiot when it comes to technology.
Well, they're aware of that.
No, they're all aware of that. But yeah, that would be hilarious. Truthfully, I wouldn't last 5 minutes.
I same thing. We're like, so do you know how to have this do this application in this software? And you're like, no, not at all. No clue. And I'm glad that we have people on our team. So Rob and Schneider. So yes, our developer's name are Rob Schneider, are wizards right now, and they're really good at it. But we're looking to add someone to the team. So they're interviewing a couple of people right now. And I was thinking about this. You and I have I don't know if posh is the right word, but we have a great role. And we get to sometimes, think about, man, well, we're really thankful for our job and what we get to do. And some people hate what they do. But we didn't really get interviewed. They didn't really ask us what we thought about the role or anything. We just kind of got hired from afar.
What, for our jobs?
Yeah.
Yeah, that is true. It's funny how that works. They're like, this was probably 6 years ago at this point. They're like, hey, we need a guy to talk injuries. You know injuries? Yeah. Okay, cool. come on board. And, I didn't mess it up. I guess I did it good enough to stick around. And that's my strategy with this company, Kyle. It's just like fly under the radar, not be the best, not be the worst, just, stay alive.
I think I have a weird role at this point where if it's like, is there any correlation or any weird thing with the stats? Like, okay, well, I'll go figure it out. Because I've kind of dug myself into a hole where I love statistics because you get to share a story and you get to connect with people and people understand it. For dynasty purposes, we'll talk about some of those today, but it's like there's also this weird route where once I get started, like today, I was doing a little research. I was looking at some of these rookies. We'll talk about Jayden Daniels, talk about Bucky Irving. Next week, we'll talk about wide receivers and tight ends. And there seems to be a common thread that I just keep finding in my research, and it's real simple. Did you wake up at 5 a.m. before everyone else in your team? That's the common thread I saw.
Or as the kids would say, do you have that dog or not? And, it's just, I love that the hit rate is 100% on this class. Like when you have a news blurb, and I'll use the word news very loosely here, but there's a quote from Todd Bowles about Bucky Irving, like, yeah, he's the first one in the building, last one to leave, which is just one of the most classic footballisms of all time. Brock Bowers is the first one at the breakfast table every morning. You guys saw what happened this year. I mean, hey, was Caleb the first one there? Doesn't look like it based off the performance on the field. So based in your breakfast model, there is a 100% hit rate going on right now with this rookie class.
Yeah, with the Jayden Daniels one, I remember this summer, they talked about that like some of the veterans were like, man, he's beating us in here. He's getting in, before us. He's reviewing everything. And you love seeing that. But also in all those blurbs was Luke McCaffrey, fellow rookie. Like, man, I got to get there. I'm there with Jayden Daniels. It didn't really work out for him. He tried to basically join in on the breakfast model. And it's clear you got some work to do, little McCaffrey. And so add that into 2025. When we talk about these prospects, which we will get to unveil that over the next coming weeks leading up to April. If there's no breakfast mentioned, so none at all, they don't even say it's an important meal, I have questions.
Adjust the ranks.
Yeah. So on this episode, we will do a rookie review, talk about the quarterbacks and running backs. Running backs a little light this year, but we'll talk about some of them. Give some of our thoughts for college football and college football playoff. Your Penn State Nittany Lions are still in this thing. How's that feeling?
Half excited, half terrified. You know, this show will be out on Wednesday, so tomorrow I'll be very nervous all day. But when the bracket came out, and it's very fun with it being, you know, the expanded format this year and everything. But I mean, the path for Penn State to this point relative to the other teams, you know, they got a pretty nice draw, I'll say. So, which is just hilarious, right? Like Oregon beats Penn State for the Big Ten title. Congratulations, you get Ohio State in the second round. So the seeding is flawed. Don't get me wrong, I have no bias on that. It's definitely an easy path to get here. Thursday will be a real test against a very good Notre Dame team.
Yeah, Betz, his family, everybody's family, they're Penn State lifers, and I'm here in SEC country. So we do get to talk college football a little bit more just between us, and then when the calendar turns, we kind of get to take that and funnel it through Dynasty talk. So the Ballers don't get as much. I mean, in Arizona, it's not a big deal. This year it was with Arizona State. So I feel like it was the one day a year where Jason showed up as a college football fan in our chat, just like nonstop, like, oh, I love this. And then he'll never talk about it again.
And that game against Texas was unreal. Such a fun watch.
Yeah, for sure. So a couple quick things off the top before we get into the main stuff here. The big thing we have is Super Bowl Sunday. Our Dynasty Pass will be released. That's where all the prospects will be revealed and some of our production profiles, the Dominator ratings, early mock drafts, the Ballers rookie rankings. We will adjust those throughout the process, but that comes out Super Bowl Sunday. So if you're one of those people that wants the Dynasty Pass, that's something that Betz and I get to pour a lot of the next coming months into. I did a rookie, a prospect primer. So if you're one of those people, it's like, I know the class, I know a couple of the names. This was a chance to look at all the prospects, quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends, and kind of have a top-down approach of saying, what do we look for in these prospects when we do our film scouting, when we talk about, hey, this player is in this percentile in this category, and some of the historical things that matter to us. So, you know, when it comes to zone coverage, with quarterback, their pressure to sack ratio, all of those things, I put in the primer, and those will be in the Dynasty Pass. So that'll be out very, very soon. And then this is a selfish announcement, and maybe it's more of a complaint. Betz and I get to complain about this on the DFS and betting podcast, but Ballers aren't here, so we can complain more to HR about this. But the DFS Pass is free for the NFL playoffs. So Betz and I put together a product for those that, you know, do a little wagering. They play DFS all throughout the playoffs. It's completely free, and it's another slap in the face from corporate.
Corporate can shove it. You know, I'll be honest. Every year, I always forget at the end of the year that this is a thing, and then after the regular season is over, when this happens, I just get more upset. Yeah, come check it out. It's for free. There's literally no hook or anything. Like, it's just, we want you guys to try it, and if you like it, come back next year. If you don't, no sweat. It's free. So yeah, you can check it out. We have all these tools for you guys: the optimizer, articles, player props, all that sort of thing. It's all in there to help you guys win. And these are some of my favorite slates of the year. Like, the wild card slate is really, really fun. 6 games that are very high profile. And then this goes all the way through the Super Bowl. So a couple weeks here to try it out for about a month. And like I said, if you like it, come back next year. If not, no worries.
I used to feel bad when we started doing this a couple years ago, because people would, you know, lash out, be like, hey, but I paid for this, you know, a couple months ago. I paid for this a couple weeks ago. And then I realized very quickly, it's very rare that you can share a product with someone that is, I won't say guaranteed, or else, you know, everybody would be buying it, but like, you get to make money off of this in terms of how you play DFS. And we had a very, very good year in the prop street. So if you want more of that content, DFS and betting podcast that comes out on Friday, you can be a part of that at dfspass.com. All right, changing gears here. We don't need any more announcements. College football playoff finals, all of those things are going on right now. But you and I are starting the process of looking at college film, and I see some people in our Discord channel. I got this question the other day, and I want to throw out to you. Is there anything you keep in mind when watching college film that's different than watching NFL? So you and I are watching every single week. We're watching the recaps. We're watching, you know, all 22. And then in college, we have to contextualize what we see. It's a different playing environment, it's different offenses, all those things. So is there anything that you keep in mind when watching college film?
Yeah, I think the offensive schemes and situations are a lot more different to me than they are in the pros. Like, we know the play callers in the NFL. We know most of the coordinators. Like, we kind of understand their tendencies of what the offense should look like based off of kind of what we've seen, not just this year, but in previous seasons. In college, I'll be honest with people, like, I don't know the play callers, right? Like, I don't know the schemes. I don't know, like, what teams are supposed to be doing, kind of what their identity is when I turn on the tape. So, like, having that kind of understanding, it sometimes helps. Like, I think back to the Tennessee offense of a couple of years ago when Jalen Hyatt came out, Hendon Hooker came out. Like, the raw stats for Jalen Hyatt were incredible. Like, the dude won the Blitnikoff Award. But then you kind of like peel back the curtain and you're like, oh, okay, I see what's going on here. Like, a lot of this stuff is, out of the slot, and it's kind of this Mickey Mouse type stuff where it's more designed, and it's not as like a real NFL offense would suggest. I'm not saying that's why Hyatt failed in the NFL or relative to expectations didn't perform, but just it helps to provide context. So that's one big difference for me is I don't have as good of an understanding of the college play callers, the college system, the college scheme for most offenses the way I do in the NFL.
Yeah, and I think it's easy to have hindsight with a player like Hyatt and say like, oh, that didn't work, that worked in college, but we know that wasn't going to work here. It's just hard for teams to take what a player does and then say, I'm going to be able to use them the exact same way in the NFL. It just doesn't work that way. So when you see a player and you see them excel in a certain area, that's awesome. But we also get to ask the question when we move to the NFL, like, will that work? Will that translate? Will they be used the same way? And then what am I not seeing? So what you weren't seeing with Jalen Hyatt was a refined route tree, right? Like, you weren't seeing this guy used in crossers and stuff across the middle. And then you see this team, the way that they've responded is this dude's struggling to get on the field. They draft a wide receiver, 6th overall, and it's clear that the offense has kind of moved on from him. And, he might have some room. Darius Slayton is a free agent. Wan'Dale Robinson is somehow still getting snaps in the NFL that are very inefficient. But yeah, I think that's a really good take. And the question I always say, I think I said it last year, but I say it in every single rookie analysis that I do. And I went back on our website. I've been doing this for 6-7 years looking at rookies, is what am I not seeing? I have to ask the question, what am I not seeing from this? And with quarterbacks, a lot of times you'll see these quarterbacks put up these crazy stats, these crazy deep ball stats in college, because that can work because, half of these defenders are not going to the NFL. That's just not going to happen in the NFL. So if you're not seeing a lot of intermediate throws, a lot of accuracy, it's really hard to recreate that in the NFL, Josh Allen aside. And then their offensive line kind of matters. Like, if Zach Wilson was one of those players at BYU that just like could sit back in the pocket and do whatever he wanted. And I think they had 3 players from that offensive line go to the NFL where you see this dude under pressure, it changes completely. So I think that's one of the better questions to ask this part of this process. You're going to see so many highlights. You're going to see so many great things. And so it's not there to paint a negative picture, but it is to ask the question, what am I not seeing?
For sure. And I think with quarterbacks, that's the hardest thing, right? Because like these guys are just the best of the best right now. But like you go to the NFL and it's hard, man. It's really hard. There's only 32 starting quarterbacks in the league, and you got to be very, very good to stick around for more than a couple of years. So it's really hard to get that right. But that's one thing that I look at a lot too with quarterbacks is like the pressure situation. Is how much are you under pressure? How do you handle it? What happens when you're under pressure? That sort of thing. And we'll talk about Caleb today, but like that was one of the concerns with him coming out is like, yes, he holds onto the ball, and when he does and can create, it's incredible, and he can make all the throws. But when it breaks down and he holds on too long, chaos can ensue in a negative way, and we saw that a lot this year in Chicago.
It's interesting with rookie quarterbacks. One of the telling things we talk about is, do you hit 7 starts or 10 starts in your rookie year? That's a telling sign that like, hey, this team has put forward something. And then the next year, do you keep going? And then the bigger question is like 3 years down the road, are you still starting games? There was a quarterback taken in the top 5 that started in week 18, and his name was Trey Lance. So that's a big point in his favor.
That's a big deal. I don't know if you caught the FCS championship on Monday Night, Kyle. Did you happen to catch that?
North Dakota State? Montana State?
Yeah. Apparently Trey Lance's little brother plays wide receiver for North Dakota State. So the Lance boys are just taking over the league.
I did start sorting some stats, and there was one maybe like one that's like Trey Lance did this as a rookie. And man, it's really good stuff when you realize he only played like a couple games. It's over, dude. Dude made $34 million. It's over.
It's been over, Kyle.
Oh, man. All right, let's take a quick break. We'll be right back.
Rookie Review.
It's a good time of the year. You like off-season, right?
I love the in-season, like weekly kind of schedule that happens, but the off-season is great because you get to reflect, you get to formulate new takes, get all the information. You just, like 18 weeks of NFL football information is very hard to like comprehend and actually do something actionable with it in the moment. But now we can sit back a little bit and take it all in and give some takes here. So yeah, I love the offseason. A little slower, get more time to look at rookies and think about, like I said, the year that just happened. And with the quarterbacks and running backs in this class, there's a lot of information I think we got from this past year.
Yeah, there's Dynasty folk right now. It's like, what are you talking about? There's no offseason. I'm still going. I'm in a league where the commissioner sent this long message of everything he wants to do this offseason yesterday. And I was like, brother, I just got a breather of just, did you see Aaron Rodgers after his final game? He throws 4 touchdowns. He's talking to Pam Oliver, and they've been doing this a long time. And I could just tell, like, I'm not an Aaron Rodgers guy, but I did see like the human aspect where he's just like, it wasn't the season I wanted, but I'm just, I'm beat up. I'm tired. Like, talk to me in like a couple of weeks and we'll see where this goes. And somebody asked him the question like, hey, it's, people close to you were saying that you might retire. And then his response was like, oh, there's people that are close to me. I just love like he's making fun of himself. But
yeah,
I do like this part of the offseason where we get to contextualize what we just saw. And then in Dynasty, we are making actions, we are making valuations of these players for the next couple of months, knowing that a big part of the Dynasty season is the rookie draft because that is the most valuable commodity you have. Those picks increase in value. These players you have, these quarterbacks, it might remain pretty stable in the next couple of weeks. Maybe in the playoffs, somebody will jump a little bit because they have this run, and then maybe they'll get a free agent wide receiver or something that kind of helps them. But just think about that. So the way that we're going to talk about this is like a checkup where these players, these rookies, we're kind of honing in on this is what went really well. Here's some historical context. Here's some areas that they can improve on. And here's their dynasty evaluation. So from this 2024 quarterback class, let's start off with Caleb Williams. For the quarterbacks, we're just going to go in order of where they were drafted. So Caleb was drafted 101 by the Bears. And in rookie drafts, he was on average going as the 101 in Superflex, 102 if somebody got cute. But routinely was going ahead of Jayden Daniels in those drafts. And then in Dynasty startups, he was going as the quarterback 8 before the season, which is interesting to say. So where do you want to start the conversation with Caleb Williams?
It's so tough because when players enter the league with the level of expectation that Caleb had, it's really hard to meet or exceed those. like we throw out this term way too much, not saying you and I, but just in general,
we would never.
The football world, generational talent. And he's been pegged that, right, for a while. Like he was kind of the next amazing quarterback prospect to come out. And anything less than that feels like a very big disappointment. Now, I will say it was a very disappointing season, obviously, for Chicago, for Caleb, for the team in general. Head coach gets fired, OC changes, all these things. And when you have team chaos that happens around you and the on-field play isn't great, it's very hard to be really good, not just in the NFL, but for fantasy as well. And we saw that with Caleb, where, the expectation coming in, and I did think this was the case, is like, we've really never seen the first overall pick at quarterback get dropped into a situation on paper where it looks as good as it does, right? You got DJ Moore. He's a superstar. Keenan Allen. Yeah, he's older, but he's been a superstar and he's still super reliable. You get Rome Odunze, a top 10 pick. We should be good here. And obviously we saw that go south pretty quick. So yeah, I think relative to expectation, it was a very big disappointment. There's still enough on tape though that I saw with Caleb where the arm talent the special plays are still very much in the range of potential outcomes. I just have a lot of questions about the overall situation, which is not something we were talking about entering the year. So a lot has changed in Chicago. They'll get a new coaching staff, a new coordinator, and all that. So we'll see in year 2 on Caleb, but I still don't have any real doubt about the actual physical tools for Caleb.
Yeah, he's an interesting player when you look at week to week how he produces for fantasy, because a lot of his big games, which he had 5 games finishing inside the top 6 of the position, which is awesome. Like, you saw the high-end fantasy finishes, except the way that it happened, if you go through those games, is that first half Caleb was very different than second half Caleb in games. He had these kind of backdoor finishes. We saw that on Thanksgiving, right? Like, it was against the Lions and they couldn't figure out the timeout situation, but he kind of backdoored his way there. And that can work for fantasy. That in the game that we play, it's like, hey, you put up these yards. I don't care if it happened in the first quarter or the very end. I'm looking at the points at the end. It's hard to sustain that week to week. And you kind of saw these erratic games over and over. The biggest issue for Caleb, he took 68 sacks. And his pressure to sack ratio is at 31%. Only Will Levis was worse. So when you're in a category where it's just Will Levis and you, it's not great. He also threw the ball away 41 times, which is 11 more than anybody else in the NFL. Throwing the ball away is not the worst thing in the world, but usually it's the quarterbacks that are super efficient, like Jalen Hurts or Mahomes. It's like, oh, you can afford to do that because you're taking a positive play. Caleb not only was sacked a ton, so negative plays there, but he threw the ball away a ton. It was just a weird season. 44th out of 47 quarterbacks in catchable target rate. And then I found this really weird, man. Like, usually if you are a high sack quarterback, you also have a ton of INTs. Like, Will Levis kind of just proves that for us. He was the exact opposite. Tons of sacks, but a low interception ratio, 1.1%. Only CJ Stroud is better among first-round quarterbacks since 2010. I don't really know how to explain that. So do you feel like his playing style, the way that we wanted him to work from college was like, create, do all this cool stuff, escape pressure, have big plays. And I feel like the big plays just weren't there the way we wanted them.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a good way to put it. And that was the concern coming out with Caleb, that I know you were really firm in this take. And I definitely agree, was like, yes, the special plays are truly special, but can that work in the NFL? And if it doesn't, how does it go south? And you saw that with Caleb, right? Like, he held onto the ball way too long. Part of that was him, and a lot of sacks are actual quarterback problems. The offensive line also struggled, dealt with injury. The coordinator and the scheme was atrocious. So you have those 3 things working together, and it's just chaos, and that is likely to result in failure. And as you saw, so with a quarterback like this, like, it kind of feels like he needs to be on schedule, on time, get the ball out quick, some of that stuff. And you saw that a little bit down the stretch where his numbers performed, the efficiency was better. The offense largely was better after the coordinator change, and he used his legs more,
yes,
which I really think helped the offense. And obviously for fantasy, we care about that a lot. But just the initial kind of month and a half to 2 months of what the offense was and how it was operating with Caleb holding the ball too long, trying to create when under pressure, just did not work. And then you think about that, okay, on first down, you take a sack. Okay, now it's second and long. The defense knows exactly what you're going to do. They're going to bring pressure. Now it's third and long. You really can't make up for that, especially with a rookie quarterback. So I think it was just kind of top to bottom, just, disappointment from all 3 phases, whether the coaching staff, Caleb himself, the offensive line. Like I said, I'm still optimistic on just the overall talent he has, but I do think you need to see a really big switch in the way he processes and looks at defenses to have some success as an NFL starter long term.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm filing away for prospect evaluation is it's something I talked about with Bryce Young too. But if you're a quarterback and your trump card is being an escape artist or improvisation wizard, which is cool, like, it's really fun in college. If you don't get the ball out quickly in the NFL, it can lead to a lot of issues because the off-script stuff just doesn't work and you run into so many problems. So I think with Caleb, there's a lot more tighter window throws than he realized. Like, in the pros, I can't do this. This doesn't work the same way. My question for you, though, is he a buy this offseason? Like, I'm wondering, will he fall behind other quarterbacks? Because we have the unknowns of who's their head coach, who's their coordinator. You see what Jayden Daniels did, so took away a lot of attention of everyone's going to say, like, oh, you should have taken Daniels over him, kind of like Stroud and Young last year conversation. And then Bo Nix is also in the playoffs. Drake May is exciting. They're going to have a new system as well. So do you feel like Caleb Williams is in a sweet spot where kind of a back-end quarterback one value, like I'd be willing to go in on that price because I feel like we just kind of saw a floor.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. And I definitely think that's probably a fair price for him, is like somewhere in the quarterback 10 to 13-ish range. I mean, once we get into that spot, it's, we're kind of tearing these guys out. But yeah, I think that's a fair market evaluation. The problem I have, though, is if people drafted him first overall in their Superflex league, or even in single quarterback, like 7th, 8th, 9th pick, something like that, nobody's really looking to be like, okay, I'm out. Like, it was terrible, I'm out right away. So you're probably still going to have to pay a pretty steep price to get him via trade. But like in a Dynasty startup, I'd be very much interested in that price. I think the trade is tough because nobody's going to want to give him away for cheap.
Yeah, you brought up the rushing. I thought that was just a nice bonus. Like, I knew that was in his bag, but 28 yards per game is nice. Like, if he can stay around 25 plus and you see the increased efficiency this next year, whoever their coordinator is, Ben Johnson, I don't know. I think that would be super interesting. So overall, I hate saying this, but like, this is kind of what I expected from him. Like the train wreck footwork stuff, and just not the same INTs, but tons of sacks. And I think it'll be better this next year. I can't wait to talk Odunze. I feel like I have a lot of questions about Odunze from this past year.
Yeah, weird season. We'll talk about him on next week's show, but weird season for him. Kind of a weird season for the Bears in general.
They're just a weird team, man. I'm sorry if you're a Bears fan, you're just like, yeah, I get it. We're a weird team. I saw somebody post, it was a Bears fan, it's like, what kind of sick individuals are we? Where they listed like how many losing seasons they've had in their lifetime. Like, why do I still do this to myself?
When I knew it was going to be not a failure, but like not live up to expectation? Do you remember like in August, like 2 weeks before the season, there was I forget who did it, what site or what company, but it was like a public report of fan expectation to your team about winning the Super Bowl or winning the division, and then they compared it to the actual like betting odds, and the Bears mismatch was like way higher expectation for fans relative to the betting markets. And I was like, oh no, like this is probably not going to go well. Yeah, people were excited, man. Like, think back to even like redraft leagues, like best ball drafts, like people were drafting all three of these wide receivers super early. Caleb was going super high. Like I said, I think the tough part is just living up to those expectations is really tough to do. And we saw that not just with Caleb, but we'll talk about next week too with Rome.
Yeah, I remember that preseason throw that he had Odunze that just like blew the socks off everybody. His ADP went through the roof. Yep. And I remember on the show, we were just like, okay, let's contextualize this. Let's talk about it. And I think Caleb was one of the players that did the most on our weekly rewinds of just, let's talk about what he did, what was good and what was bad. All right, next quarterback, we have to talk about Jayden Daniels, and it's really hard to talk about this guy and not smile. Like, it's just fun, man. Like, even I'm a Falcons fan, and so that game that he won in overtime, I just loved it the whole time. I loved watching pure football and somebody who's just willing his team. A lot of Washington fans, my neighbor across the street even, has basically said, like, it's been a good coaching job. It's been awesome for Jayden, and yet this roster is still weak. I mean, it's Zacchaeus right now as their wide receiver 2 that's really coming through. But Jayden Daniels finished as a quarterback 5. In Dynasty startups, back in September, he was going as a quarterback 11. You're not getting him there now. He's probably drafted, quarterback 2 or 3 in your startups, depending on what your flavor is. I would still take Lamar. I'd still take Josh Allen ahead of him. And then I think I'd take him over Burrow, but I could see either way.
Yeah, I would take him, I think, in that spot just because of the rushing. We're talking about a guy that ran for almost 900 yards and 6 touchdowns as a rookie. That's Lamar type stuff. Like, that's what Lamar does every year. So if you think that the passing can continue and or even improve, if he gets better weapons, I mean, we're talking about Terry McLaurin, who I think is a stud. I've loved him for forever. But Jayden Daniels is elevating his teammates, and that to me is a signal of a truly good quarterback. Noah Brown, Olamide Zacchaeus, the ghost of Zach Ertz, which credit to Zach Ertz, he's still doing it, man. Just won't go away. He's been like the guy that we've been talking about for like 4 years. It's like, Zach Ertz is still there. But he's elevating all of those guys that I mean, let's be honest, nobody really views as a difference maker. So he's elevating all the teammates around him, which is a great signal. So I think the passing efficiency and production can continue to improve. And so, yeah, if you're getting somewhere in that, assuming health, like 700 to 1,000 yards most seasons for Jayden Daniels, which I think is very realistic, that's a top 5 dynasty quarterback, no question.
Yeah, the scrambles were historic. I mean, 75 total scrambles is the most in the PFF era, so that's a big deal. It's an undesigned run. He ran 4.8 scrambles per game at LSU, and then this year was 4.4. So you were kind of seeing the same exact, hey, the play breaks down, I'm taking off. And a scramble, just so you know, it's way more valuable than just a pure rush attempt. Now, when you get inside the 5, those Jalen Hurts attempts obviously skew a lot of things, but a scramble, quarterbacks average over 7 yards per carry on that. So just think about what you're adding every single time somebody takes off, and he's done it more than anybody in the PFF era. The difference between Caleb and Jayden, apart from just 12 wins and 5 wins, is that they just got the ball out quick. I feel like Cliff is somebody that we've kind of poked fun at over the years, Cliff Kingsbury, but something he did really, really well is got the ball out quick, the 4th fastest time to throw according to Next Gen Stats, and his 86% adjusted completion on throws under 2.5 seconds was the 3rd best among all quarterbacks. And when you go through his stats and you have to compare him, it stinks. I wish I had somebody different, but this is Lamar. This is like literally how Lamar excels for fantasy. It's scramble rate, and when he does get the ball out fast, it's awesome. Where Caleb was, let me dance around and try to get fantasy points from that. The problem is points outside the pocket aren't as dependable as the ones where he just gets the ball out quickly. So there's not much negative to say here. I mean, he did still take a ton of sacks. His pressure to sack ratio was 28%, which is not great. It was 43rd out of 47 quarterbacks, but he's a rookie. You also didn't see as many deep balls. Like, we remember the Terry McLaurin ones that won games and were just off the charts, like best EPA from a duo since Gronk and Brady. But I feel like that could be another step if they add another playmaker this next year.
Definitely. And going back to his college days, especially his final couple years at LSU, the deep ball was money with Brian Thomas Jr. I mean, it helps throwing to Brian Thomas Jr. and Malik Neighbors, which in hindsight are 2 superstars. But that was one of his calling cards, was the scrambling and that deep ball ability. And yeah, you saw it at times, like you said, with Terry, but I wonder if they put that more on his shoulders or make it more of a focal point of the offense in year 2, where he's earned the trust of the coaching staff. His decision making will probably be a little bit faster, a little bit easier to process. Whereas early on, and we kind of laughed in the preseason, it was like, oh my goodness, the Cliff horizontal rate is really here. They're going to do it again. With a rookie quarterback, maybe that's not the worst thing in the world, right? Just push some easy buttons every now and then and good things can happen. And we did not see that in Chicago. We saw that a ton in Washington. So yeah, credit to Cliff. I think we all poked fun and kind of thought it would not go great, especially with the supporting cast. But Jayden is just that dude. And yeah, I do think that deep ball component can be even better in 2025 if they add another downfield playmaker.
I looked up this stat. He had the same amount of rushing fantasy points per game, so fantasy points just from running the ball, as Josh Allen, but Josh Allen had double the amount of rushing touchdowns. So you're getting that type of production, and then as a passer, he was super efficient. They have the 3rd most cap space for 2025. We talked about that before Christmas. Was what do they do here? They're probably going to extend McLaurin. Brian Robinson is up for an extension. He has 1 more year left in his deal. And then the only wide receivers under contract for 2025, Terry McLaurin and Lil McCaffrey, who tried to get in on the breakfast narrative. But we'll see. This is a fun team. It's a fun team to figure out. Cliff is also somebody that's going to be interviewed for head coaching positions.
True.
So we'll see how that is. But Jayden Daniels, he's the man. All right, next dude we're going to talk about is Drake May. He's drafted 3rd overall. You and I were a little bit higher on Drake May than Jason was, I remember, in that conversation. And we liked his college tape. He didn't start until week 6, but he averaged 37 rushing yards per game in his 11 starts. So throughout this last game where he just kind of took a couple snaps, but 37 rushing yards per game, that's a really, really big deal. Dating back to 2010, I mean, there's only been 6 other quarterbacks to do that. So you kind of get this sneaky role, maybe adds more as a goal line runner next year, but I liked what I saw from a fantasy perspective in year 1 from Drake May.
Yeah, real quick before we're going to talk about the rushing here, I think, in more detail, but just the names that you have on this list for historical starts, again, it's averaged at least 37 rushing yards per game and 11 starts. These are like the names on the list. It's like RG3, Josh Allen, Jayden Daniels, Cam Newton, Vince Young, Justin Fields, Kyler, like those are all really good fantasy names, right? And we don't think about Drake May in that light. Like, I think a lot of us know, oh yeah, he runs a little bit and like he can scramble and that's great. But like, again, those names, as what they did as rookies, are like, or were anyway, very elite fantasy assets when they were on the field. Now, of course, Vince Young didn't stick around the league and RG3 got injured and all that, but just historically, I think it's really important to point that out, because if he does that again this year and continues that, but then they get an actual wide receiver or two wide receivers, like, I don't want to get greedy here. If they get weapons, improve the offensive line a little bit, you could really see a difference maker in fantasy. The tricky thing for me is it's always going to be tough for a quarterback to put up fantasy points at a high rate when your touchdown expectation every week is like
right
2 touchdowns maybe. You're lucky to get 3, right? Like their team total in like the betting markets every week is like 16.5, right? It's very hard to be fantasy elite at that mark. So yeah, a lot of good signs from Drake May in year one. The scrambling was great. The deep ball attempts that we saw in spurts were really exciting. But again, the weapons aren't good enough. The offensive line isn't good enough. The coaching staff really struggled. So despite all of that, you still saw some positive things from Drake May. And I think given the context of the team, I'd be pretty excited if I had Drake May on my Dynasty roster.
I know somewhere listening, Kayshon Boutte is probably really mad at you, saying like, hey man, did you see what I did over the last like month and a half of the season?
How did Jaylen Polk do?
Dude, what a whiff of a pick. And I hate declaring that this early, but when we do the wide receiver review and in the offseason I get to review the different thresholds, I'm pretty sure Jaylen Polk might have put together one of the worst rookie seasons from a yards per out run perspective of like put it this way, I think it's going to come out worse than Terrace Marshall Jr.
Oh no. It was bad. It's very bad.
It was really bad when he couldn't even get on the field.
I was going to say he couldn't even get on the field, and it's not like he was competing against future Hall of Famers out there to get on the field. So yeah, the weaponry is just atrocious. Now, all offseason, the conversation was like they're in the market for a true wide receiver one, like Brandon Ayuk before he re-signed in San Francisco. There was like, okay, if T leaves Cincy, maybe he goes there. As the days go by, like I think T Higgins is going back to Cincinnati. All the talk out of Burrow and the team suggests that that's the plan anyway. We'll see. But it's like, who even could they bring in as a top wide receiver, free agent or what they do in the draft? We'll see. But yeah, I mean, again, given the context of the team, I'm excited about what Drake May did. A lot needs to change for him to be like a true top 6-7 starting option every week. A lot has to change, but I think the tools are there if the pieces are in place.
Yeah, if he's your quarterback 2 in Superflex, let's say you took him, he was going as the 107 in rookie Superflex drafts. You probably feel really good right now. You're like, sweet, I have somebody that can improve. I have a rushing floor. We'll see how they add. I mean, they picked 4th overall, so maybe that's somewhere in Travis Hunter, McMillan phase. I don't know of the where they could be. One of the weirdest things I want to bring up is Alex Van Pelt, who's been around for a long time. He was a Browns offensive coordinator. They just didn't use play action at all, which was his bread and butter with the Browns. And so Drake May was 33rd out of 35 in terms of play action rate. They just didn't have a running game. I know I was really upset about this, and I'm not trying to confirm, but what the heck were they doing extending Ramondre Stevenson? Like, it sounds like the stupidest use of money for extending somebody who's that old, that point in his career, when you're really competing against yourself. And towards the end of the season, it's clear like they're like, yeah, we don't want to give you snaps anymore.
It's just the decision-making all around from the team was questionable. And Gerard Mayo, I mean, obviously he's gotten fired already, but like just didn't seem ready. So top down, like infrastructure situation in New England right now just doesn't seem great.
Yeah, Robert Kraft, their owner, I just loved his quote after with the Gerard Mayo thing, which I felt really sad. Like he did say like, man, this was really tough for me. I've known Gerard for a long time. But his quote is just, our drafts have not been good for a while. It's like, yeah, man, you guys are terrible in a lot of different areas, especially a wide receiver. So maybe they add to that. Drake May, among 31 qualifying rookie quarterbacks for the last 10 seasons, 4th in dropback success rate. So there's a lot to like here, and there are some pretty deep balls. Like I will say, I might have watched a film or two right before this where it was just show me all the Drake May attempts over 20 plus yards, and they looked really good. So any last thoughts on him and how you evaluate?
No, I don't think so. I think we've said most on him. Like I said, I'm excited to have him where the expectation was, given the context, pretty low. I do think he's an interesting trade for guy if you really buy into the tools, which I do. That depends on asking price, of course, but if you think the situation can get better, which truthfully, like, how could it not? The offensive line was a disaster. Like, starting guys at center in week 17 and 18 that had never played center in the NFL, like, just truly horrific.
Never played football.
It was actually the equipment staff out there on the line. Truly, like, we need to be careful saying this, but it can't get worse, given the situation of what happened. So yeah, I'm still a big believer in the talent and the upside of Drake May, assuming they put the right pieces around him.
All right, let's take a quick break, and then we have to talk about this next quarterback because he is just lighting the world on fire. Yep, we're going to talk about Michael Penix right now. Okay, it's only 3 starts, so I don't want to get ahead of myself. It was a fun fantasy end of season. It was not a fun NFL end of season as a Falcons fan. But shocking the world, they took him 8th overall. Man, what a roller coaster of emotions I felt that night when he was drafted. And now I feel like the jersey that I have of Michael Penix will not go unworn. I can at least say that. And we've only seen 3 starts. So where do you want to start this conversation on Penix?
Yeah, I kind of feel bad for all of us that mocked the pick, because in hindsight, and it's always easy to say it in hindsight.
I mean, I mocked myself. Let's be honest.
Everybody did. Me, you, everybody on the internet, everyone, right? We should have been mocking the contract.
They said the internet was undefeated.
The internet never loses, Kyle. And you can't put anything on the internet if it's not true. We should have been making fun of the contract for Kirk Cousins, which in hindsight is a complete train wreck, obviously, right? So yeah, credit to the Falcons for at least having a plan in place to say if Kirk isn't right, we got our guy. And it's hard to say after 3 starts if he is or is not the guy, but he's definitely the starting quarterback entering this next year. And if he never got on the field, I don't think if you had him in Dynasty, you'd ever really feel that confidence of saying at least I know I have a starter moving forward to see if he can build on a couple of starts. So obviously a small sample size, but when he was in there, didn't take sacks at a high level, only a 9.7 pressure to sack ratio. Very, very good. In his 3 starts was top 10 in PFF pass grade, which, I don't put a ton of stock into, but comparing it to his peers in the NFL, very good mark. 7.5 YPA, pretty strong, small sample size, but when he was out there was, I think, competent and showed a lot of really good arm talent. When he can set his base and deliver the ball, dude can sling it. So the arm talent is there. That's no question. You get Drake London. You still have Darnell Mooney. You get Bijan. The weapons are there around you to feel pretty confident about the offense, having some spike weeks, which we saw obviously a lot this year. So yeah, I think Penix, probably a solid quarterback 2 to have on your roster. But I wouldn't be depending on Penix to be a true difference maker, because he's not going to give you a ton of rushing. I know he had the rushing score in week 18, but he's not going to give you a ton of rushing. So he will have to have some upside in the pass game for it to hit. We'll see if that can happen. But I think after 3 starts, if you've got him on your squad and you kind of took him as there's no quarterbacks left in my rookie draft, so I guess I'll just take Penix and see what happens. If that was you and this happened the last couple of weeks, I mean, I'd feel pretty excited about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's exciting. If you just watch some of the games, there's some absolute lasers, just darts thrown. There's one to Ray McLeod. That was just the timing. I feel like that was the part that was so off with Kirk. Speaking a little bit as a fan, but just man, the timing on some of these throws, the fact that he just said, Drake London is our dude. Drake London was targeted on 41% of his routes in those 3 Penix games. So elite stuff. And then the intermediate and deep throws were not always accurate, but he just went for it, and there was actually a chance on those. So his grade on deep throws were just awesome in the short amount of time. So a lot of stuff. I mean, he wasn't perfect when you look at his completion percentage and everything else, but I do worry for dynasty perspective if his value will be artificially inflated because we only remember the last little bit in the last game where it went off. So I wonder if his value is going to go up a little too much, people want to buy in. Where at the end of the day, you look at if he's going to give you nothing on the ground or relatively nothing. I know he had a rushing touchdown, but the ceiling of players like that is like QB 8, QB 9. Like they have to have an outlier season. So you get this blend of, and I hate giving a lefty comp, but it's Tua, or my comp for him production wise was Geno Smith. You get these 300-yard games, but at the end of the day, it's like QB 8 might be where you end up.
Yeah, I think that's a really good reminder for people, because I was mentioning, like, if you took him in your draft in like the second round of some Superflex leagues, depending on how your league viewed him, the expectation was like, this guy might not do anything, and if Kirk's just the guy for 3 years, like, I wasted a pick, so what? Like, if that was you and that was your expectation and you got this, you should be very excited. Does not mean he will turn into a top 5, top 8 fantasy quarterback, because like you said, these pocket passers do have to rely on efficiency to get there. You'll have up and down seasons along the way. But yeah, I mean, if you're in a Superflex league, like if Penix can give you top 16, top 17 type numbers as your quarterback too, again, relative to cost, that's a phenomenal return on your investment as a second round rookie pick, a late first in Superflex, something like that. So yeah, relative to cost, I'd be excited if I had Penix, but I do agree with you. The ceiling is potentially capped just without the rushing.
It's also a good reminder of all the conversations we had in the offseason of, well, here's Kirk's contract, and why would they raise the pick on a guy that might not even play for the first 2 years? Who knows? Maybe it's his 4th year, and we joked about like, oh, he's going to be this old by the time he, does this. Like, this is just so much conjecture of what you think is going to happen 4 years from now. And then the other side of the equation, just I'm telling you some Falcons talk here, is there are so many people locally that are like, I told you so. See, our GM, Terry Fontenot, knew what he was doing. He had a backup plan in place the entire time. It's like, this is just confirming whatever you want. Whatever was going to happen. If Kirk had a good season, it confirmed it. If Penix took over, it confirmed it. It's like, this type of analysis is just doo-doo. But I looked it up. Kirk didn't do so well when he was under center at all this year. And that's something with the offense that definitely, like, Bijan's awesome. So if you're under center, you can actually have a play action passing game, but Bijan like covers a multitude of issues with the team. Kirk was not good. He had 45 total attempts under center this year, and his quarterback rating was 45.
Yikes. Yeah, he couldn't move. And obviously, easier to say now in hindsight, but like getting Penix under center, doing some of the things that you thought your offense would be able to do if Kirk was healthy, you saw some of those things down the stretch. So yeah, Penix, we'll see what he can do in year 2 when he's the full-time starter. But like I said, relative to cost, I think you got to be pretty excited about what you got from Penix here.
All right, let's move on to Bo Nix, or as we call him, Bo Nix.
Bo Nix.
Taken 12th overall. The first reaction when Bo Nix was like, this sounds like a very Sean Payton thing. Old quarterbacks, man, that never works. It's something in my process that I love finding historical comparisons. So, I have different sites, shout out to StatHead, where you can search by these things, and I have different databases that I can say, okay, at this age or at this production level, here's what these players have done historically. Now, another thing we usually do, though, is try to make sure we give some context, because just because, I don't know, Chad Pennington, I'm just picking a random old quarterback, like, just because he did this way back in the day with the Jets does not mean that affects at all what Bo Nix is doing right now with the Broncos. Like, those things are orthogonal. They don't actually connect. They don't influence each other. But Bo Nix, for someone that came in the league this old, balled out, man. I mean, 29 passing touchdowns on the season. That's the second most ever for a rookie quarterback. And from week 5 on, so it took him a little bit, but from week 5 on, he was the quarterback 6 in fantasy. What if I told you that I traded Bo Nix before week 5? Like, literally the week before week 5.
In Dynasty?
In Dynasty.
What'd you trade him for?
I got Drake May. Bo Nix and a pick for Drake May at the time.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I would still feel a little uneasy about that, obviously, with the season he's had.
But at the time,
I think at the
felt
time,
smart.
It was fine. Yeah. But now not so smart.
Oh, man. Yeah. So Bo Nix, Denver's in the playoffs for the first time since 2015. He was accurate. I looked this up. He has the highest completion percentage inside the 10-yard line in the NFL. Not just rookies, but 71%. So they got in close. It was really, really good. What do you think moving forward, based on what he's done? Like, do you feel like his value is going to end up being like QB 12, QB 11? Like that's kind of where he's being pushed up, and that's a pretty steep price. But I mean, he was awesome.
Yeah, hard to argue with the movement in the market in terms of his price because he does deserve it. 29 passing touchdowns this year, second most ever for rookie quarterback. And for context, I love to give the names with this because it gives you an idea of like what you're talking about with quarterback play. I mean, Herbert, Bo Nix, Baker Mayfield, Russell Wilson, Peyton Manning. Pretty good guys. Like, remember Russ right now, obviously, but for years he was the dude in Seattle. So yeah, just the rookie season he had was very strong. Also added almost 500 rushing yards, which the rushing kind of dipped a little bit down the stretch. I know in week 18 he crushed, but dipped a little bit, but you still have that in his range of potential outcomes where I do think he's a very solid asset to have in Dynasty, one that I'd be very excited to have. I do want to see them potentially add somebody else opposite Courtland Sutton. And maybe Marvin Mims is that dude. It's hard to say, right? Like he wasn't on the field very much, but when he was down the stretch, it was absolutely incredible. So another like legitimate playmaker would be helpful to help elevate his ceiling. But I think based off what you saw, not taking a ton of sacks, getting the ball out on time, can run a little bit, can operate the offense. I mean, that's what he did at Oregon, right? Like that's the exact scouting report was like, he's going to run a little, he'll get the ball out on time, he's not going to take sacks ever. Those things translate very well to the NFL, and you saw that in year one. So yeah, I think Nix is here to stay. But like I said, I would love to see them add like a legit second option across from Sutton. And then Marvin Mims can be that gadget guy or that kind of rotational guy and really take this offense to another level. So yeah, I'm excited about Bo Nix for sure, man. It was a definitely one that I did not see coming. I don't think a lot of people did. He would win Rookie of the Year if it wasn't for Jayden Daniels.
Yeah, if you would have told me a couple years back when he was at Auburn, like, hey, this guy is going to be not only a first-round pick, but lead his team to the playoffs as a rookie, I would have thought you were crazy. Like, just completely.
And Jayden Daniels at Arizona State.
Oh, for sure. Andy has that conversation being an Arizona State guy. It's like, I mean, that's just such a wild thought. I mean, that team was really fun. If you know the roster, that Arizona State team was like Ayuk and Pearsall and all those other random dudes. But like Auburn, it was a bad roster. And you kind of see now, it's like, man, maybe Bo Nix just needed to change environment. I did want to throw out a couple areas for him to improve. And it is my favorite thing to talk about with quarterbacks is the intermediate area of the field, 11 to 19 yards. It was only 18% of his attempts. Only Anthony Richardson actually graded out worse here for PFF. And if you go through it, Bo Nix, a lot of his throws, 62% of them were 10 yards and in. So that's a huge majority of his throws. But he also had the most balls batted down in the NFL. So that's just a weird quirk when I look at throwaways and those kind of things. It's just like the way you're seeing the defense. He had the fourth highest checkdown rate, and his completion percentage over expectation was actually worse than Will Levis. So I take some of his completion numbers and kind of have to adjust them because it's like, okay, you're getting so many quick hitters that it boosts your overall number to be 66% at the end of the year. It's like, I don't really care about that number. I care about what you're doing in this area. And I just wonder, like, they just didn't have a dude other than Courtland Sutton in that area of the field on kind of those middle ends that like, hey, you can go to work there. So maybe they improve, maybe they change that. It's like on this team, even checking down on the running back has not been a great EV move for this team for a while. They don't have any tight ends. They hated Greg Dulcich so much that they cut him. So yeah, they need some different players. Would you rather have Drake May or Bo Nix in Dynasty?
Ooh, that's tough because pre this year it would have been Drake May. I think I'd lean Bo Nix. I think he's shown enough.
Okay, pre-week 5, I clearly wanted Drake May, and now I feel like it's a coin flip. You're getting the rushing there. It's just kind of like it's one of those things where who gets an alpha, because Courtland Sutton's not going to be that forever. Like, who's going to get an alpha wide receiver the next year or two? That would probably change it for me. So I'm going to just still say May slightly because I just think he has more raw upside. I think Bo Nix can be a fine top 15 quarterback for the next couple of years, and we'll see how they go from there. Yeah. I was going to mention Spencer Rattler, and now I'm done.
Don't. No need.
Yeah. All right, so we're going to get to running backs. We actually spent a lot of time on quarterbacks because they played this year and they were good. The running backs was a very different situation, and I am very sad to report this. But I had a really cool stat that I've used every single year that at least 2 rookie running backs are top 24 since 2012. I mean, like you go through the list every single year, there's at least 2 running backs. We only had one this year. Tyrone Tracy finished as RB25 and RB26. So I guess I could like mess with the data and no one will ever know, right?
Right. But he was the RB15 after he took over for Singletary. So
you tell me.
If you want to fudge the numbers, you could.
I mean, okay, be honest. Like you guys listen to us throw out numbers. Like, could I just like say whatever I want and people be like, oh yeah, totally.
No, yeah, nobody's fact checking you, Kyle, on some of the stuff. So you could just, Kyle's actually been lying to you guys for years on our shows and nobody's called him out yet.
Yeah, I could not live with myself if I just made up some of those things, but like that's one that's so close. It's like, does it really matter if he's RB 24, 25? Not really. But it was not great this year. I mean, if you look at where running backs were taken in the NFL draft, Jonathan Brooks was the first running back drafted. That's a sad story. I don't really want to spend time right now talking about it because I don't have my full thoughts, but that's sad. Trey Benson, Blake Corum, Marshawn Lloyd, Jalen Wright, the next 4 running backs. I feel like you drafted them in rookie drafts thinking, oh, they'll be the guy at some point, maybe this year or at least next year. And right now, if you took those guys in the second round, a lot of those guys were like early second round in rookie drafts. I feel like you lost value.
True. I mean, almost every single player on this list lost value. Like the only one that really gained a ton of value, obviously, was Bucky Irving, who we'll talk about. Tyrone Tracy, for where you took him in rookie drafts, was a smash. Like for a 3rd round rookie pick in single quarterback leagues, absolute massive return on your investment. Then from there, it's like, man, people had high hopes for maybe Marshawn Lloyd eating into the Josh Jacobs workload. Just couldn't get on the field. Blake Corum never got on the field for the Rams. Benson, same story. We saw some flashes every now and then from Jalen Wright, but again, couldn't even overtake like Raheem Mostert for the RB2 with Achane. So, yeah, overall, a very, very disappointing class. And coming in, people were down on this class, us included. And I think we see now in hindsight, obviously, why. There's not a lot of dynasty value with the names on this list, in my opinion, right now, outside of Bucky.
I mean, Rashina Lee, who was, my favorite little fun sleeper end of your draft, got 10 carries on the season. I don't know if you knew that.
That's not a lot.
It's pretty bad. Even like the last running back that was taken, Dylan Lauby, he had 1 carry. Do you know what he did with it?
I'm going to say he ran for 0 yards.
He fumbled.
Okay, come on, Dylan.
Dude, you had 1 shot. Do not miss your chance, man. So it was pretty underwhelming from a rookie running back perspective, but we did want to highlight a couple of different names here. And we have to start with Bucky Irving. And I just want to start off by saying, maybe I filed this to HR. I felt like I was bullied by Jason into liking Bucky Irving less. I remember going through the scouting process, and I've got the receipts from our Slack exchanges from Jason and you and me. And I was like, God, I kind of like Bucky. I feel like I'm liking him in the scouting process. I think he's kind of James Cook-esque. I kind of think he plays bigger. I like him. And you kind of like Bucky too. And Jason's like, oh no, he is too small. He did not test very well. Not a big Bucky guy. Let's not like Bucky.
Putting Jason on blast when he's not even here. I love it.
Mm-hmm. I
can't blame you.
The thing with Bucky coming out for this, like just from like overall, like when you're scouting dynasty stuff, because he looked good to me on film, and yet where he was drafted and the way that he tested was like, we shouldn't like this player.
Well, I do think there was a bunch of, well, let me take a step back. When he was at Oregon his last year, the guy caught over 50 passes. For a college running back to do that is massive. So that immediately was like, okay, this guy should be on our radar. But then he did go to Indy, didn't test great, dropped to the 4th round. Those are 2 negative data points in his overall picture. So I think if you were like just kind of lukewarm on Bucky and like he's fine, I don't think that was like a bad take going into the season because some data points said that. fourth round running backs don't work out very often. Just straight up they don't. But to Bucky's credit, like, just a good player. And that's kind of what you saw on tape with him, is like,
got the dog.
I know he doesn't really test well. Yeah, he's undersized, but like when he has the ball, he's efficient. He's good. His vision is great. He can break tackles. Like, he's just a good player. And you really saw that. And so what Tampa needed this year was somebody that could actually elevate the run game with Rachaad White, who's been struggling for the last couple of years ever since he entered the league as a runner. And really, Bucky was incredible. I mean, among all running backs with 75 plus carries, he was top 10 in yards per carry, explosive rush rate. He was third in missed tackles forced per attempt. He was also super efficient as a pass catcher. 1.63 yards per out run, was sixth. Jahmyr Gibbs, for context, 1.67. So we're talking about a guy that was just ultra efficient with his touches. And I do think the size might cap him from a overall workload standpoint in the NFL. Like, nobody's expecting him to be a Jonathan Taylor type where he gives you 22 carries in a week, but 16-ish carries plus 4 or 5 targets, like that's what fantasy, that's what we should be chasing, is like that kind of role. And I think he's got it. So tied to a good offense, tied to Baker Mayfield, a lot to be excited about here with Bucky Irving.
Yeah, the run game for the Buccaneers was definitely one of the biggest surprises for me this year, and seeing how efficient they were. And, with Dave Canales, that was one thing that never really worked a year ago. But from week 10 on, you're talking about the workload. He saw 30% of Tampa Bay's total rush attempts and targets. So they were kind of giving him an elite workload, and Rachaad White was still there. So that kind of shocked me too, that this wasn't just like an Achane or Kamara early in his career where it's like, oh, you're going to max out at 15 touches. That's all we're going to give you. Just, be hyper efficient. But 1,500 plus scrimmage yards, and he averaged 6 yards per touch. That's wild stuff for any running back, but especially as a rookie. It's really awesome. And if you had Bucky and you took him, like, he was late second round, third round in some leagues, you are just rolling right now. And right now, he's a top 10 dynasty running back to me. I mean, do you put him there?
I'd have to kind of go through the list, but I do think when you factor in, like, the biggest jump guys usually see in their workload is from year 1 to year 2. So if we think that can happen for Bucky, and maybe he's not as efficient, but still very efficient with this offense, like, yeah, I think you got to feel pretty good about that. So I do think top 10 is fair. I don't know where I'd have him on that list with some of the other names, but I think the running back position in general this past year, while the hits were awesome for like redraft, there's still so many question marks for Dynasty, yes. Right? Like, Henry's another year older. Yes, Saquon was incredible, but Saquon is another year older. Breece Hall was pretty disappointing. Like, some of those names are still kind of dropping down a little bit, so that will allow Bucky to come up in value. So I see what you're saying there for sure.
I think one of the fun processes for people that play Dynasty is you have to recontextualize every position every single year in the offseason. Because when you throw out terms like that, like I said, oh, he's a top 10 running back, you're like, yeah. And then you have to put the names, like you said, like actually like put them in order and figure out where they are. Now, the running back position, you might say like, oh, yeah, he's top 10 and this guy's here or there. And then you start naming the dudes and you get to like RB15, you're like, I don't feel really comfortable in some of these names. So let me give you a couple just to compare. You don't have to go through the deep analysis. Would you rather have Bucky Irving or Breece Hall in Dynasty? Who, by the way, Breece Hall is entering the final year of his rookie deal.
I did know that. I think I would take Bucky.
I think I would too. Wild. I know. It's Bucky Irving or James Cook also entering the final year. Who might get an extension this offseason?
Yeah, that's a straight up coin flip, honestly. I guess I lean Bucky just for the age factor, but I'd still like those two. They're so similar, right? With like how they play in terms of
that was one of the comps.
Not just like a little undersized, but they can give you the rushing attempts, but also the pass catching work is what you're excited about. So to me, those guys are a coin flip.
I love how James Cook just blew up any like thought process. Like, oh, he just doesn't score touchdowns. This is Josh Allen. It's like, dude, no, I'm gonna like run for 15 touchdowns. So all of you guys can just shove it. All right, last one. Bucky Irving or Josh Jacobs?
Bucky.
Yeah. So right there, it seems like he's probably around RB 8-ish, 9-ish. Yeah. He's a fun player. So if you were building your team and you already had some running back firepower, and then you had Bucky as like, he's my RB 3 or 4. Like, you have a stacked roster potentially with Bucky Irving. All right, couple more rookie names. Really, the only other major fantasy name was Tyrone Tracy Jr., was drafted in the 5th round, 166 overall by the Giants, finished as the RB25, and I'm just going to take a massive L here because everything in my research says if you're old and you're a running back, just bet against it. And so far, it's usually a really good bet, right? He changed positions later on in his career, and everybody wanted to give the Antonio Gibson comp. Oh, he was a wide receiver, but he's a running back. He's going to be used this way. They used him as the workhorse, despite spending a ton of money in running back world for Devin Singletary. This dude was a usage monster. And if you look at yards from scrimmage among running backs that were 24 or older as rookies, it's the 5th most for a guy drafted this old, 1,123 scrimmage yards. So usage-wise, or if you got him off your wire, or however you drafted him, 3rd, 4th round of your rookie draft, like you got some gold. I think the bigger question is, what is he moving forward?
That is the question for sure. Yeah, good player, fun player to watch, explosive, can play in the pass game. Like the things that you like about him, I mean, not surprising, right? He was a former wide receiver, so very good in the pass game. But he is 25 years old. This is a former 5th round pick. Even if the Giants can finally land a quarterback and maybe the offensive line improves a little, it's like, does the offense succeed enough in the next year, in this season, 2025, for him to be a true difference maker? And that's where I really struggle with it because, again, the touchdown expectation every week for the Giants, just like the Patriots, is like non-existent. So it's very hard to find fantasy ceiling when your offense can't score touchdowns. And sure, it might get better this year, but how much, right? That's the major question that I have in New York. They're bringing back the coaching staff and the GM and all those things, but Tyrone Tracy does feel like a pretty good trade away candidate to me if your league values him as like the guy for the next couple of years for the Giants, because it does feel, and I hate to give this comp because it kind of feels lazy, but like it does feel like Antonio Gibson, where it's like he showed you enough in year 1. If you took him in the 3rd round of your draft, you are doing cartwheels, like you're super excited. But understand the timeline here is very short for him to be an asset. Again, already 25 years old. So I don't think he's a guy that lands a second contract as a starter. And I think by the time you get to the 3rd year in the NFL, maybe the 4th, like his time is kind of come and gone, is most likely. I mean, could we be wrong about that? Absolutely. Things change all the time and outliers happen. But just historically, these are the guys that I bet against long term. So he was a fun guy. I had him on a couple squads. I'll definitely be looking to potentially flip him this offseason.
I'm 100% with you in that thinking. I just thought it was so funny to think like, man, as a rookie, he did really, really well, but he's basically like out. I mean, he's too old, and by this time he's gone. It's like if somebody like started their job, any other field, it's like, man, they did awesome their first year, but we kind of know how things are going to go, so you got to let you go. It's like, wait a second, I thought I had a really good year. It's one of those things where he gets boosted by the excitement of what he could be. If he did this in year 1, what could he be? And often with those players in Dynasty, the hype is more than it should be. I'm looking at Devin Singletary's contract. He's going to be on this team this next year. 6.25 cap hit, $6 million dead cap. So they're not going to cut him. They're not going to save any money. He'll be gone the next year. I think Devin Singletary is a fine player in the NFL. He got his money, but I think you might see some rotational stuff too this next year too. So I worry. There's a lot of moving parts for that team, but it's maybe a better point of saying, if you get players like this in your draft, Bucky or Tyrone Tracy, you can just be thankful, and you don't always have to morph them into something or think that it's only going to get better from here. You can just say, I got a really good rookie season. Now Bucky's different, but like, I got a good season from Tracy. I could cash out, but I'm not going to like say that he's way more than, he should be just based on what he did in his short area work. So like, would you rather have Tyrone Tracy or David Montgomery?
Montgomery.
Yeah. I would rather have a veteran there. Would you rather have Tyrone Tracy or Brian Robinson Jr.?
That's tough. I guess I would just take the better offense and take B-Rob, but I think it's pretty close.
Okay. And one more here. Would you rather have Tyrone Tracy or Joe Mixon?
I would take Mixon.
I would too, and I have the same pause because at the end of the year, like, dude, the engine would not start anymore with Mixon. It was just sputtering, which is what we kind of thought going into the season. He was running pretty hot on touchdowns, and the whole offense, I mean, they just needed other dudes out there. By the end of the year, it was Xavier Hutchinson and Robert Woods having snaps. But I think I'd still take Mixon, take the better offense. But I think Tracy's more in that low-end RB2, like RB 23, 24. And I think people are seeing him more as like a top 20 guy.
Agreed.
All right, a couple more names here. We're running long, but who cares, man? Corporate's not here. Let's keep talking.
We can do what we want. Do whatever we want.
Yeah, we're talking rookie running backs that didn't really do a ton for fantasy, but we're going to keep talking about him. Ray Davis, another old dude who actually was a lot better than I thought in terms of valuable per-touch role. Now, he didn't do a ton with him in yardage, but like it seemed like the team liked him. They also used Ty Johnson way more than I thought. I mean, the running back role, the running role, let's put it that way, for the Bills, between Allen, James Cook, Davis, Ty Johnson was like a valuable role. I'm going to figure out the numbers for that. But, he was taken in the 4th round and that, I mean, there's a bunch of dudes all drafted around the same spot in the 4th round of Jalen Wright, Bucky Irving, Will Shipley, Ray Davis, Garindo, Braylon Allen, all those guys taken there. What are your quick thoughts on Ray Davis?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of a struggle to even get on the field, which, even if you're tied to one of the best offenses, it's hard to be a consistent starter in your lineup. And with Ray Davis, outside of maybe the 1 week James Cook missed, obviously nobody was really putting him in their lineup. He played less than 33% of the snaps in every game except for week 18, which you can't really count, and week 6 when James Cook missed. So he was a rotational piece behind James Cook, like you said, was decent with his touches. I mean, his broken tackle rate was very good. 4th among all qualified running backs with 75 plus carries. So when he got the ball, he was good. And coming out of Kentucky, like I know Jason liked him a little bit from his tape, can break some tackles, can be effective in the pass game. But unless there's an injury to James Cook, I just don't see really a consistent path for Ray Davis. So he's a guy that in Dynasty doesn't have a ton of value. Certainly should be on every league, should be rostered and be on, your bench or something. But outside of that, not a ton of value here, most likely for Ray Davis.
Yeah. And I think once you see a James Cook extension, which you will probably see this offseason after 15 rushing touchdowns, his value will plummet. And that's a good point if you just want to go after him as a James Cook manager. That's the best place to do it. Yeah, I think when he has opportunities, he'll be fine. And it's kind of like Charbonnet. Charbonnet is inefficient sometimes on a per-touch basis, but if he gets workload, he can work for fantasy, and that's kind of like his role. So you really need injuries around there. Isaac Garindo is the other running back that at least finished in the top 50 among rookies. Also round 4, physical freak at the combine. And I would say looked really good on a per-touch basis, down the stretch when we actually got playing time.
Definitely, yeah. In his 4 games where he played at least 55% of the snaps, he was a top 12 running back 3 times. And the one time he wasn't, he was RB26. So even when he was bad, he was still usable in fantasy. Now, obviously, all this happened with injuries to Jordan Mason and the Christian McCaffrey saga and all that. But at least if you took him, you had zero expectation, right? He was probably a 4th round rookie draft pick or something like that, where it's okay, the speed score is great and he's a little older, so probably won't work, but maybe he can be the RB2 for Christian McCaffrey. And I think he answered that question. I know the team likes Jordan Mason. He just was not dependable this year from an injury perspective. So I wonder if they look at McCaffrey's situation, they look at kind of picking the RB2 this year. It's well, hey, Garindo's already on the team on a super, super cheap tag. Jordan Mason's a free agent. I think he's the RB2 next year for McCaffrey. And Kyle Shanahan can change his mind, out of nowhere. He just always does that with running backs. But his value is specifically tied to being the RB2 behind an aging, sometimes often injured Christian McCaffrey. But at least when he was on the field, he showed you could do it. Looked explosive, very good in the scheme. I think his skill set fits the Kyle Shanahan scheme very well. So yeah, outside of injury to Christian McCaffrey, you probably aren't getting very much, but we know Christian McCaffrey could get hurt. And if he does, I think you've got a top 12 back in those weeks. So kind of like Ray Davis, more of a bench stash, but certainly more explosive, a better athlete than Ray Davis.
Yeah, I think that's all you could say. I mean, Jordan Mason's a restricted free agent, so there's a good chance he's back with this team on a cheap, 1-year tender. But yeah, Garindo, for a player that was okay, they took him, okay, he's the 4th string guy, okay, this is great. You performed the way you were supposed to.
OKs.
I know. All right, a couple other names I want to mention at the very, very end here. We'll have a full write-up on our site, and then also in the Dynasty Pass, we will have running back profiles. I just wanted to mention Audric Estime because, one, let's just say that we hit on the anytime touchdown prop. It was week 18, I threw a haymaker, and Bet's like, I hate you. But
it worked.
It worked. But also, Javonte Williams is a free agent this offseason, and I don't know how the backfield is going to shake out. It seems like they trust him as the early down thumper, and his 51% rush success rate was actually really, really good. If you look over the last 5 years, anybody that's over 50% has mostly been a really good hit rate. So is he anything more than just, early downs and a couple of, dump offs? It's fine, but it's a system we like. Maybe the offense takes another step forward. It's like more like a top 15 offense. And I think Audric Estime is one of those players that if you drafted him late, you're grateful for where you took him and that he's held value and that it could go up this offseason.
Yeah, it could go up. He's kind of one of those guys that just feels like there's zero ceiling. Like, I mean, any running back could fall into a 12 touchdown season in the right situation.
That's what I'm searching for.
But the success rate is good, which basically means like he got what was blocked for you. Coaches do value that. Like, I kind of make fun of coaches and stuff, but like stay ahead of the chains, set up third and manageable. he feels like that kind of back, but he'll come off the field and pass downs. Yeah, exactly. He'll come off the field and pass downs. Unlikely to give you a lot of explosive plays. Like didn't really give any of that this year. So very much like get you 4, 5, 6 yards here and there. And if he volumes his way there and gets the goal line roll, it could work for fantasy. But I really struggle to see the ceiling for a guy like Audric Estime. Not great draft capital. Sean Payton will always rotate his guys, right, with their specific roles that they have. So that's the tough part in Estime. Wasn't a huge fan of him coming out. So overall, I think he's just a fine bench stash to have. But obviously, you need a lot to go right for him to be a weekly starter.
I looked back at my notes from last year's episode on Estime, and I just remember thinking, like, this dude thinks that he's playing video games out there because he would try some weird stuff, like weird spins and jumps and stuff like that. It's like, dude, you're a really big dude. I don't know if you should be hitting that button on the control stick. But yeah, we'll see what he becomes.
Yeah. The other name I wanted to bring up quickly is Braylon Allen, who is actually going to celebrate his 21st birthday here on January 20th. So technically still not 21, very young. Production profile coming out of college was incredible. The age was incredible. Speed score is good. All those things. When I think back to Braylon Allen's season, obviously it was the Breece Hall show for the most part, but I remember there was like times of the year where he was working in as kind of a thorn in Breece Hall's side. And in my head, I remember him being like very good when he was on the field. But when I look back and look at the numbers, it was actually kind of terrible. Like I don't know. It was a mismatch. The raw stat line was 92 carries for 334 yards, 2 scores, 27 targets. He got 19 of those for 148. But the underlying metrics were like horrendous. Like only Gus Edwards was worse from an explosive rush rate standpoint than Braylon Allen. So he wasn't giving you big plays. He was 50th in yards per carry. Next Gen Stats has a metric, rushing yards over expected per attempt. He was 46th out of 47 qualifying backs.
Not good.
I was very surprised by that because when I think about Braylon Allen, it's like, oh, he's this young kind of explosive, back, but the numbers say otherwise. So I'd have to go back and watch him again to kind of get more context on the situation. The Jets in general were a disaster for most of the year, obviously. But yeah, kind of a head-scratching situation for me with Braylon Allen. And Breece is back, so you're not really going to get a true workhorse role this year unless Breece goes down. But I still think that he could become one in the league. Like I said, he's just so young. So Braylon Allen's like a guy that I'd be excited to have on a bench, but obviously you're not expecting very much in the short term. So yeah, what are your thoughts on Allen? What did you see this year?
It sounds like I'm going to cut up a thing of film that says, here's every single Braylon Allen carry from this past year, all 92 attempts.
If you could do that so I don't have to, that would be great.
I'll probably end up doing it. There's a lot of these players, so I'm like, well, I know I'm going to put together a Bucky one, which is going to be fun.
It's going to take a long time to watch.
Yeah. The Bucky one, let me find somebody who's just like a turd. So like I said, here's the Rasheen Ali, 10 attempts. Here they are, 31 yards.
It's a 6-second clip.
Oh man, I need to find somebody that just like had like, oh, the Dylan Laube. Here's every single carry from Dylan Laube this year. Oh, that was it. Yeah, I mean, Allen's one of those players that we get at least the benefit of, we got a lot more time in front of us. This dude could be in the league for 10 years, possibly, which for a running back is kind of wild. But Breece is a giant question mark. And I'm excited to talk about him because I think there are people with real questions this offseason of what do I do with players like that? They could get a contract extension, but man, there's so many question marks with the Jets. A lot of running backs too in that third year right now, going into their fourth. Walker, Cook, Pacheco, Rashad White, all of these dudes. It's like, okay, Kyron Williams, we got to figure out like what is the situation, who gets extended and who doesn't. So that's going to do it. And next week we'll be talking wide receivers. I feel like there's a lot of great wide receivers. We're going to talk about some Marv, talk about some Brian Thomas Jr. Probably won't talk about Jalen Polk. So Betz, sign us off.
Polk just scratching strays at the end of a show about quarterbacks and running backs. It's just mean, man. We'll see you guys next week. Have a great week. Enjoy the college football playoff, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening to the Fantasy Footballers Dynasty Podcast. If you want to take your dynasty skills to the next level, check out thefantasyfootballers.com.